Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 95. We have got the most exciting CPU launch of all time to go through, the 9850 X3D. Steve was super excited to test this one. Everyone watched that video. It has gone off for us. It's been great. We're also going to talk a little bit more about NVIDIA GPUs, the current situation. There's been further updates, more stuff from AIBs, more reporting being done. So we're going to talk a lot about that in this week's episode. So let's get into it. Well, Steve, it seems like you've tested one of the least exciting CPUs that we've seen in quite some time, the 9850 X3D. It sounds like there has been virtually no surprises with this particular product. So you just want to give a quick recap of exactly what we can now officially tell you is the 9850 X3D's performance.
Officially, it's on average 3 to 4% faster, depending on the games.
Blisteringly fast.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me. I saw some people in the comments and on Reddit arguing about exactly how fast the 9850 X3D is, because some reviewers apparently had it like 1 to 2% faster, some had it 3 to 4, some had it 5 to 6, and they wanted to start like this internal, inquiry as to why there was this discrepancy between reviews. It's like, guys, doesn't matter if it's 1 to 2, 3 to 4, wherever, doesn't matter. It's not much faster. Really, on paper, the spec indicates that realistically, you're probably going to see somewhere in the range of 3 to 5%, depending on how heavily threaded the game is and other variables. So AMD themselves said 3%. If you're seeing less than that, it's probably due to the game either being very CPU heavy or the results being a bit more, say, GPU limited than they are CPU limited. But regardless, not worth arguing about. The 9850 X3D is a smidgen faster than the 9800 X3D. It's a smidgen more expensive and a lot less efficient. So it's like, it's an inoffensive product. It's not exciting. It's not outrageous in any way. It's not necessarily necessary. I wouldn't say it's completely unnecessary either. It's a thing now that exists. And if you were looking at buying a 9800 X3D, you'd probably get a 9850 X3D instead just cause. But yeah, it's what more can I say, really? That's the summary. It's just an inoffensive, boring CPU that didn't really need to exist, but it does. And because it does, you might as well get it.
Yeah, it was funny yesterday when I was over at your place, we were recording some Q&As, doing our monthly live stream for Patreon members and all of that stuff. And we were thinking about what to put on the title and thumbnail. We're like, how do we get people interested in watching this review? And we couldn't come up with anything. So that's why we didn't really do any like juicy clickbait or anything on the title and thumbnail. We were just like, well, we don't really want to let people know the exact percentage we got, because that's the only interesting thing about the entire review. Like, to say that it was 4% faster or whatever is like, there's no point watching the review if we put that in the title and thumbnail, but then there's nothing else to say about it. Like, it is basically the exact same process of being re-released. Like, I know that it is slightly faster, but realistically, it's not changing too much about that part. Mm-hmm. Like, if you had a 9800 X3D, you wouldn't be devastated that they've released this. Mm-hmm. And if you were going to a retailer and, you got confused, you accidentally picked up a 9800 X3D when you were thinking about getting a 9850, oh well, like, you haven't exactly lost out on all that much. So there was nothing really that we could like get people in on. And I've seen some other YouTubers and creators go with titles like, playing up about how inefficient it is and how it's like a marketing stunt. I think I saw that from one of the channels. But really, like, maybe it would have been a marketing stunt if it was like $600 or some like absurdly expensive price. Maybe the power consumption would matter, but it doesn't seem that, like, it's obviously less efficient, but does that matter for this sort of gaming processor? There's not a lot of interest, like it exists. Mm-hmm. It's almost not even worth testing. And they're probably shown by how the videos have performed that I've seen, including our video, hasn't exactly gone off. So yeah, it's a pretty weird CPU. Why do you think AMD released it? Like, what's the point of releasing it?
Well, they didn't really have anything else to do. So it's like, if you can do a mid product cycle refresh, it seems to be that that's something companies will do, especially there doesn't really need to be much justification for that other than, like I said, I think in the last podcast, I think the primary goal is just to try and draw up a bit of interest in the brand and sell CPUs and products, really. Get a bit of excitement, get some headlines, and, basically try and extend their lead a bit more. It's kind of like when you're in the lead and you want to crush your competition, if you have an RTX 5090, you want like the RTX 5091 and the RTX 5090, you know what I mean? Like 8 versions just sitting at the top of the graph. It just looks silly. And then all the competing parts are down the bottom. So now you've got like the 7800X 3D, the 9800X 3D, the 9850X 3D, all at the top of most of the gaming graphs. And then you've got, the 14900K under that, and then the 285K anywhere under that. Can be with the 1400K or towards the bottom of the graph, because the 25K is just all over the place. Very inconsistent performer, that one. But yeah, I think they just made it to really strengthen the brand more than anything, which is probably, if that was the goal, I would say I'd say AMD rather did a good job of not screwing this one up, because I really imagined a situation where this was just hideously expensive. And they're like, well, we've only got so much of this top tier silicon. So, there's no point just making it $20 more, because people just buy that instead and we don't have enough of them. And, it ends up being, I think, $600 or something absurd like that, which, Intel's always made the KS CPUs like $100 US more, which would have made this thing like $580 US, which would have been super duper dumb. So they didn't stuff it up in that sense. It's just as I said, if you're honest about it, it's just an inoffensive product. It's whatever. I'm not.
Yeah.
Nothing about it upsets me, really. It's just.
Yeah, I think if this was more of a mid-range processor and they were sort of releasing a slightly differently binned version that was clocked slightly higher, there'd be pretty much most reviewers probably wouldn't even look at it. I mean, they've done that many times in the past. They've made slightly different bins of certain parts, and there's not a lot of interest in those because you can kind of guess the performance based on the testing that was done with the previous model. I think we've seen a lot of reviews because it is the highest end model, so that kind of changes things a little bit. But if this was, say, let's say the 9650 X3D, they'd already made a 9600 X3D. They're now releasing a slightly higher clock version. I wouldn't have expected too many reviews. I think people probably would have just left it alone, especially at the price that it is at, which is, as you sort of said, inoffensive. So, yeah, I mean, I think another angle that we sort of saw some of at CES was this idea that, some OEM system integrators are using the 9850 X3D in their 2026 product refreshes for like high-end gaming pre-builts and that sort of thing. I think Dell announced like an Alienware gaming desktop that uses the 9850 X3D. This seems like the perfect sort of part for those systems where they always want to be releasing on yearly cycles. They want to have the new, latest and greatest. Like, we're using the latest Ryzen processor, no matter how relevant that actually makes it. So it seems like, they've avoided the pitfalls of making it absurdly priced for the DIY market, but they're also in some ways facilitating those AIB system integrator builds where they can now say, well, our 2026 model is slightly faster than the model that we offered last year. You're getting a little bit more, because otherwise all of those 2026 desktops that they'll be releasing the start of this year would have really no advantage whatsoever. There'd be no reason to buy a 2026 model. And yeah, I mean, if you review those systems, that is probably the case over a discounted 2025 model. But I'm thinking of it more from a company perspective. They don't want to just be like, well, our 2026 model is using literally the same components as last year. They now have at least something to offer in that sense. That doesn't necessarily make it great or anything, but that potentially is also why they've, released this product. So yeah, the price, I think I said in the announcement video that I was expecting it to be sort of like what you said, around $600 US. They didn't do that, so they've obviously avoided the sort of milking of consumers angle that was certainly possible if it was absurdly expensive. And I guess that's sort of a good sign for AMD, considering they are in the leadership position. They're in a position where they can milk customers if they really wanted to, but they've sort of avoided that in a sense that it's, it is probably not costing them all that much more to make a 9850 X3D. If anything, it's the exact same price to manufacture as the older model. So they're getting slightly more now from this part. I think the interesting thing, though, will be how expensive 9800 X3Ds will be. Are they going to drop down in price now that there's a new model? Is the 7800 X3D going to drop down in price further? That's not that much slower than the 9850 X3D. So, it's probably not going to be the best value part when those other parts start becoming a little cheaper. But again, it's like, it's not egregious or offensive or anything. It's like a $500 flagship CPU. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's right. Flagship products generally aren't known for being great value. So I think you can give them a pass on that one.
When it comes to the power consumption, obviously you found that it was quite a bit less efficient than the previous models. Do you think that is at all an important factor for people buying it? Like, would you be swayed against getting it because of that factor over something like a 7800 X3D or 9800 X3D?
No, not really. If you're concerned about that, it sort of comes back to the value thing as well. Like, you're probably more concerned about the value aspect of it. So you would go with a 7800 X3D over the Zen 5 models. I think power consumption only becomes a concern when it makes the part run excessively hot, no matter what you strap onto it. And it heats up your room. I mean, we built Balin when he first started working at Harbour Unboxed. Was it a 13900K or a 14900K? I don't remember. It was one of those Core i9 variants, both very power hungry, very hot. And he had a 3x3 meter room, is his little sort of gaming room. And there's no air conditioning in there. And it was just that computer would cook that room because of the CPU. So he changed out to a 7800 X3D, and he said the difference was significant. It just never got to the temperatures it used to get to, the room, that is, not just the CPU. So it's clearly putting out a lot more, it's consuming a lot more power and converting that into a lot more heat, which is, heating up his room. So when the consequences are your actual computer room is noticeably hotter, I think that's when power consumption starts to become a problem. But when you're talking about an extra, 20, 30 watts or whatever, that's, it's not going to do it. It's when you're talking about 100, 150, 200 watts more power consumption that it starts to become a big problem. I don't think it's a deal breaker or anything. It's just worth noting that one of the huge benefits of the 7800 X3D and 9800 X3D for gaming is the fact that they are so power efficient. They use such a small amount of power to deliver the performance you see. Of course, there are other benefits as well, not just the resulting performance, but also the fact that I'd consider them sort of no-fuss solutions. I mean, you don't even need to go into your BIOS and load your memory profiles, and you'll get performance very close to what's seen in the review, which is pretty wild. Never before have we really seen a CPU where that's the case. Stuff like the 14900K is surprisingly powerful without loading Expo. But previous sort of Zen 3, Zen 2 CPUs, they've just fallen off a cliff if you don't, run them with optimal low latency memory with the profiles loaded. The performance was just really bad. They were extremely memory sensitive. So a lot of the DDR5 parts have improved in that sense. But anyway, don't think the power is a big deal. It's just worth being aware of. But obviously, if you're after a flagship part, the absolute best performance, the power consumption is less of a concern. And I guess that's why the 14900K and the 1300K sort of got away with it, because at the time they were offering top tier performance, or very near to, depending on how you want to debate that with like a 7800 X3D. But, people were willing to ignore those issues because the performance was good.
Yeah, that's why there wasn't, too many angles for the title and thumbnail, as I sort of said. It's like, if we're sort of accepting that previously for a flagship part, it was perfectly fine to have like a 14900K level power consumption, the 9850 X3D is not anywhere near as egregious as that. So you can't really say like, oh, AMD is, thrown efficiency out the window with this part. It's crazy how far they're trying to push it. It's like, well, it's not that crazy. Like we've seen crazier parts in recent memory that were being recommended as the fastest gaming processor. So they're not at that level, and that seems perfectly fine to me. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's still rumors that there will be a 9950 X3D2 at some point as well. So a 16-core model with 3D V cache on both of the CCDs instead of just one, like the current 16-core X3D model. Not 100% sure what the status is on that. I'm pretty sure they will be releasing this at some point. I think the rumors are largely accurate as far as I know, but I don't have like super solid information on that. I'm just sort of reading into the rumors and that sort of thing. So I think we'll probably see that within the next couple of months as well as another sort of potential, marketing opportunity. Hey, let's get people excited about Ryzen again. Let's release another part. Let's get people testing it. But that processor could be even more underwhelming for gaming, considering adding Vcache to the extra CCD is probably going to do nothing. Whereas at least the 9850 XD was clocked slightly higher. So there was at least something there for gamers, even if it wasn't amazingly fast.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The next thing, further updates have happened since our last podcast about NVIDIA GPU supply. And I think one of the very interesting things that happened, I think pretty soon, it might have even happened before we published the podcast, but after we recorded it, was DeBauer, so Roman's video, where he looked into this based on his contacts and found out about something called the OPP and how that is being cancelled by NVIDIA. So it's well worth watching DeBauer's video where he goes through all of the details and everything. So we'll link that in the description for this podcast. But essentially, Roman's reporting suggested that NVIDIA had a program called OPP, which I believe was called the Open Price Program or something along those lines, reported by other people who found out what the acronym actually meant. But this was essentially a rebate program. So when NVIDIA was selling the GPU and memory bundles to AIBs, it was being sold at a price, according to Roman's reporting, that meant that the MSRP would not have been able to be hit. So without this program, just the standard stock price meant that AIBs had to sell their models after manufacturing PCBs, all that sort of stuff, at a higher than MSRP price. However, with the NVIDIA OPP, NVIDIA was supplying a rebate to AIBs to get some of those graphics cards, specifically the base models usually, down to the MSRP. And so this kind of explained why at the launch of products like the 5070 Ti, you would have seen a couple of models, maybe an MSI Shadow or an Asus Prime non-OC, available for $750 US, but then the vast majority of other models, there was a significant jump up in price to something like $900 at launch for the following models. So the next up in the stack, and some brands didn't even have the base MSRP cards. And so that was always a little weird. We were sort of wondering what was exactly the reason for that at launch. And it kind of cooled off as time went on. There were more MSRP cards available. But it seemed that DeBauer's gotten this information that that was largely due to this OPP, this rebating system. And with current supply issues, NVIDIA, according to Roman, has cancelled the OPP entirely. So his reporting was suggesting that the MSRP, which essentially relied on this program, will not be possible at all because this program has effectively been ended. NVIDIA is just not interested in rebating AIBs anymore. They're for the supply that they've got. Maybe they want the most money that they can possibly get. And so, yeah, according to Roman, not only will there be limited supply of some of these models, and he sort of, backed up some of our reporting on the 5070 Ti not being available, but also if across all of the models, if you were interested in an MSRP card, just not going to happen. Like it's just not going to happen, pretty much dead. And so, yeah, GPU prices are going to be quite bad and resupplies are going to be quite expensive. So did you watch Roman's video? Did you have any thoughts on the sort of things that he was saying in that video?
I watched the video, good video. None of it really surprised me. And as I said, we know for a fact that NVIDIA and AMD both offer rebates and subsidize their own products to, AMD said before that, don't know if they've said it publicly, they've definitely said to us that, can't remember the language they use, but they've made steps to facilitate the MSRP so that, they've they've taken action to allow their partners to hit those, suggested retail prices. So yeah, it's a thing they've been doing for a long time, and I'm not surprised they're canceling the program now because it doesn't really make sense to have that program exist at this point in time. And it's not like they've fired a ton of people that ran the OPP or they've made some irreversible decision. It was something that wasn't really public, and it was just something they worked on with their partners. When you say cancel, it could easily mean pause, right?
Yeah.
Because at some point in time, I'm certain NVIDIA is going to have to come back to selling GeForce GPUs as one of their primary revenue streams. And they're going to need to be competitive when they do that. So the OPP comes back the second they need to do that.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's quite interesting when you sort of speak to the AIBs about how all the dynamics around pricing work. Because one of the complaints that we've consistently heard, and some companies have put on the record, especially EVGA around the time that they were ending their entire company effectively by exiting the GPU market, there's been all this frustration with AIBs that the margins on GPUs from NVIDIA, AMD are very, very low. So the amount that they're having to pay to make these, to purchase the GPU bundles, the GPU and memory bundles is so high that there's not a lot of margin left over to actually manufacture the PCB, manufacture the cooler, package it, ship it, get it to retailers. And then, of course, there's the distributor margins, the retailer margins, and all of that is factored into such a small percentage that a lot of AIBs have expressed frustration that they just can't meet the MSRP because there's no money available to do so. And so that's why there's a lot of these premium boards being manufactured. And there's all these like sort of back channel systems going on to sort of make the MSRP quote unquote not fake, but they can quite easily manipulate that because of these sorts of programs. So we sort of saw that with the 9070 XT as an AMD example, where we heard that originally, there were the AIBs, the prices that they were having to purchase the bundles for was more targeted towards a $750 or thereabouts MSRP for that card. And then when AMD at the last minute decided to adjust the price, that meant they had to go through and start rebating either the partners themselves or the retailers or whoever to achieve those prices. And what you saw was they did that for a limited bunch of cards, but not all of them. So effectively, by not using wide rebates, AMD was able to make a lot more money because the demand was there at $750. People were buying them in droves at that time. And so by not rebating a whole bunch of cards, they saved money. And so it seems like there's all of these, and there's been lots of discussion about fake MSRP and that sort of stuff in the past. They're trying to do the MSRP where possible, but they're also, I guess, understanding these days that in these situations where prices go up, the companies don't want to be left with the AIBs making all the money. And that was, I think, a big problem during the crypto era where the AIBs and the distributors were making bank on these products, and NVIDIA, AMD weren't necessarily getting the majority share of that.
Well, we don't know, though, to be fair.
We don't know for sure, but I think that a lot of the price increases were related to, that some of those AIBs were pretty happy during that period because the cards were selling for thousands of dollars.
I think everyone was happy during that period except for the consumer, to be fair.
Everyone was happy, but I think now we're starting to see more of these sorts of impacts. Like there's more squeezing of things. There's more of these sort of back channel deals happening so that, companies can not be left with the bag.
I've always been hesitant to sort of buy into that stuff because from day one, NVIDIA and AMD have had all the chips. They've had all the power, all the control. It's always been that way. And I bring that up because remember like when NVIDIA did the GT 1030 DDR4, I think it was? Yeah, DDR4, right? GT 1030. And we were one of the first people to expose that product and show how dodgy it was. And a lot of the NVIDIA apologists came into the comments. They're like, you don't understand though. This is Galax that's doing this. NVIDIA, this isn't an official NVIDIA product. Yep. Like NVIDIA don't have this on their website. Like this is these corrupt, dodgy partners that are doing this. And it's just like, no, that's not how this works. Like the partners aren't able to just go source whatever memory they want and stick it with a GeForce GPU, because if they do that, they'll find that they're no longer receiving shipments of GeForce GPUs. So, and this OPP program very clearly demonstrates the level of control that a company like NVIDIA does have over its partners, because MSI, ASUS, whoever it is, has to do exactly what they want, or they're not getting reimbursed or subsidized in some way. Like it's just not happening. And I mean, obviously, well, it'd be a bigger problem if they weren't getting any allocation altogether. So they've got them over a barrel when it comes to getting money back, being able to actually compete on price and get the thing to begin with. So to say that, NVIDIA doesn't have control over its partners is a pretty wild statement. Like they have full control. Nothing happens without NVIDIA's say so. And AMD can exercise the same level of control as well. And I think in a lot of instances they do. And, they've had falling outs with companies over the years because they couldn't agree on the way to handle things. Most recently, MSI and AMD parted ways because of the way that subsidies and things like that were handled, is my understanding anyway. There was no real official statements or anything on the public record made about that, but my understanding is that, MSI just didn't like the way AMD operated and AMD weren't going to change, so they parted ways. Is sort of the unofficial read I've got on that one.
Yeah, I think the point I was making before was more that it seems like this control that you were speaking about is getting more aggressive over time, like the cost for the AIBs to purchase these GPUs. And again, I'm not saying I have like great information about this, but just the things that we were sort of seeing around the launch of this latest generation, it seems like there's even more of this occurring than there has with previous generations, where a lot of those AIB cards that we saw at launch were very expensive, more expensive than we have ever seen for sort of not even like the premium tier stuff. Like we're talking like the next tier up from the base model, the prices were just crazy at launch for some of those cards. And it took a lot longer than normal to settle. Now, NVIDIA's usually come out and says their usual statement of demand is so high, blah, blah, blah. These are all the reasons for these things. But when you sort of learn about these programs that are occurring in the background, the rebate systems that are happening, and the level of control that you've been talking about, if they over time are sort of raising the prices and saying, well, we'll just discount you more to sort of accommodate for the price increase that we're making you have, then it becomes this point where they do get more and more control. Because as soon as those rebates end, then the AIB in question is left with selling a card that may be completely not competitive in the market. And then another angle that NVIDIA has to control things as well is that for some of the models, they make their own reference designs. So if it ever came to the point where they were upset with an AIB or something and they're like, well, we're just going to manufacture more of our in-house model at the price that we want to set it at, and you're not going to be able to manufacture a card that's competitive because we're not selling the GPU bundles to you at the right price. And so, that is sort of seems to be, I guess, being implemented right now. And also, there was this, I don't know how I want to describe the report, but there was a report suggesting that, NVIDIA is quote unquote absorbing the price of the sort of the memory increases, and they're doing their best to sort of, absorb that for the customer. I think that's pretty laughable. There's really doesn't seem to be any evidence that is happening. And when you look at the prices that we're starting to see in the market now, not just for the cards we've said are effectively discontinued, but all of the models, very much seems like the cost of memory is being passed on to consumers with, no absorbing of that whatsoever.
Yeah. It's best that I just don't make a comment about that one, to be honest.
Yes. I mean, the margins on some of these cards are quite high. And if they really wanted to, if they were willing to set their margin to zero, GPU prices actually would go down, like from the MSRP. But obviously that is not happening. And another thing that we saw this week as well was Zotac Korea warning that RTX 5090 and RTX 5060 prices are set to increase. So I believe they published a statement on a retailer website, sort of talking about what's going on with a rewards point system that they had. So maybe this was some sort of system that Zotac Korea had for a particular retailer. And basically, they were saying, as translated, they're having to set their rewards points for their GPUs to 0% because, well, there's no supply. Memory supply is not coming in. GPU volumes are being reduced, and some models will be unavailable for a while. So that was a quote that they said. And they also said that there is a concern that going forward, it may become difficult to secure a stable supply of GPUs other than those Samsung can manufacture. And that, yes, this situation is so serious that it raises concerns about whether graphics card manufacturers and distributors can continue to operate. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it, because Zotac largely makes NVIDIA GPUs. They do have a few like mini PCs and handhelds and things like that, but the majority of their business is NVIDIA GPUs. Like, should those NVIDIA-only AIBs be worried about the current situation?
Well, I think that's exactly what they're saying. I think they're saying that they're very much worried. I think Zotac is very concerned about, the future of Zotac. If things continue the way they are, I don't see how the company survives. And this has obviously been a concern for a lot of these PC parts manufacturers. Zotac, I think it's fair to say mostly make GeForce GPUs as their primary product line, but they do have the mini PCs and the handhelds. Unfortunately, though, all products that Zotac make are affected by memory shortages and memory price hikes. So, they may still be able to get memory for their mini PCs, but are they going to be able to find customers for their mini PCs? Because, people don't want to pay probably what they're going to have to pay for those kind of systems moving forward. So that's really going to make it difficult for them to turn a profit. And I think they're basically saying, they're saying what might be the quiet part out loud, like, we don't actually know how we're going to survive this. It's a grim outlook, is sort of me reading between the lines on those statements. But also, they're saying what we've known for a little while now, and it's a roundabout way of saying something similar to what ASUS said, less definitively, I suppose. But they're basically saying, like, we can't really produce GPUs at this point in time. The ones that we can get our hands on are going to be, hideously expensive. So they're saying all the same sort of things, really. And it was interesting. I've been having a few conversations with a few different companies and partners since, obviously, our reporting of the 5070 Ti, just to see if anything's changing or, and basically no. I'm still getting all the same sort of information I was getting. But MSI in Australia have a lot of stock of 5070 Ti's. If you go to like PC K-Ski, which is one of Australia's larger PC parts retailers, they have all MSI 5070 Ti models in stock, though I don't know how long they've actually had that stock for. But what I find interesting is that over in the US, for example, MSI have very little stock, and in a lot of other regions, they have very little stock. But on their own US store, so like usstore.msi.com, they list 12 different 5070 Ti models, and not a single model is in stock. Like, they're all, notify me type deal. And there are MSRP pricing or models listed at the MSRP, or there's one, which is the Shadow, which makes sense. That's sort of the MSRP model. But no stock for that one. And then their most premium models, which are $900. So the Vanguard's $900 as an example, and there's no stock of that one. So 12 models, no stock directly from MSI's own store. And a lot of those models, there's no stock at any stores in the US already. And again, like, when ASUS said they were placing the 5070 Ti in sort of end of life status, which meant we're still supporting the card. It's not end of life, but our production of those models is now end of life. We are ceasing production officially. that isn't to say that you can jump online and go, look, I can buy a Tough Gaming, therefore that information's not true. Like there is, as I said last podcast, there's a lag time here, guys. So it could be 8 weeks or something. And the higher the pricing climbs on the remaining stock, the slower that stock sells. So the longer you'll see availability. Like I think the company Memory C is one of the few brands to have stock of various different ASUS models and MSI models, but they start like $1,500 US for a 5070 Ti. That's why they have stock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think this whole situation is quite interesting because the previous times that it's been hard for gamers to purchase GPUs, and this has happened in cycles. There's been a few cryptocurrency occasions. There's been times when the models have not been available at launch, and there's been it's happened before. Cryptocurrency in 2020, 2021 was probably the worst, but in most of those situations, it hasn't been because supply has been cut to the level to the GPU manufacturers that is well below their forecasts. When times there's been GPU supplies not being great at launch, that's pretty standard stuff. Most GPU manufacturers are expecting to produce the cards for a long period of time, so they're not overly concerned about having maybe a limited supply at launch. And then with the cryptocurrency situation, it wasn't that Zotac or whoever couldn't make the models, it's that they were making like as many models as they possibly could. They were flooding them out. It's just that they were all going to non-gaming use cases. And they were making bank doing so. So while crypto was like a really bad time for gamers, it was a great time to be a company like Zotac. Like you were just making bank on those situations. Whereas now we're in effectively the same sort of situation for gamers. Like cards are hard to come by. They're expensive, very similar to the crypto era. But it's now also threatening the AIBs themselves, especially those that only do GeForce GPUs and potentially AMD, depending on what their supply is going to be like, because they're not able to manufacture them. So it's a very, very different scenario that I don't think we've really seen before. There's not really been a situation I can remember where AIBs have been unable to make the models. And that has caused, and obviously there's still demand for them. So it's just something that I guess, we've never really faced before. And I think, obviously companies like ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, the big ones are going to be fine because they have a very diverse portfolio. They make lots of different things, laptops, again, handhelds, peripherals, all sorts of stuff. And so they will survive. But there are lots of companies like Zotac and other GeForce exclusive AIBs that are at serious threat of having their business severely impacted. And there are companies that may not even make GeForce GPUs, but make components that are sort of, maybe they only do one or two components. And if people aren't building PCs, that business could be threatened as well. Like if you were, let's say, a motherboard manufacturer, and that was all you did, like you sort of, I know ASRock makes a couple of different products as well, but ASRock do make a lot of motherboards. I'd be pretty worried because not a lot of people are going to be buying something like motherboards at this point in time. So that's going to be quite interesting to watch. And hopefully companies like Zotac are able to figure out ways to continue to survive without one of their biggest business models being viable.
Yeah, well, it depends on how long this goes on for. And I just saw another comment they made, which ties in with what we were hearing, because I think we spoke about in the last podcast. Some people were claiming that the reason 5070 Ti's and in particular Asus 5070 Ti's are sold out was because of our video. We created all this like extreme demand and panic buying. So, that was a situation created by our video, which is a hilarious take, but sure. But when we reached out to retailers and distributors, we heard that right now, what you're seeing right now is kind of as good as it gets for potentially this entire year. We were hearing that availability is getting worse and pricing is going to get much worse. So you think like $1,000 US is bad for a 5070 Ti. Well, brace yourself for the coming months because it's going to get worse. And so far, that's what we've been seeing. And I don't think that's still a result of us making a video about it. But hey, maybe our reach is much more impressive than we thought. But Zotac have come out and said it. On top of that, the latest prices we received are unreasonable. So what they're saying is not the pricing you're currently seeing, the pricing for making additional product is unreasonable. And they're saying this is not only for like an RTX 5090, but the increases in price for an RTX 5060 is also enormous. So if you go over to Newegg, for example, a Zotac 5060 8GB card, they only come in 8GB variants, $360 US. And what's that? That's a $300 US MSRP, is it, for the 5060?
That's right. So it's already 20% above, right?
So it's 20% above, which isn't, I mean, that's large, it's enormous, but I don't think that's what they're talking about. I think if you look at that now and go, well, it's only $60 US, which is, again, quite a large percentage above MSRP. That's the current pricing. So they're saying for additional stock, which will follow in the coming weeks and probably months, is going to be much more expensive than that. So if we're seeing a Zotac Twin Edge OC RTX 5060 selling for $360 US right now, I expect that that's going to be priced well above $400 in probably the coming weeks, depending on how fast this stuff's actually selling at existing prices. But certainly within the next month or so, you can expect to pay, I would imagine, well over $400 for those models. I'm talking about the base models as well. They're cheapest models, not like some sort of flashy, triple fan, silly RTX 5060 model.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when you look at sort of the history of DRAM prices that are reported by DRAM Exchange, and I know that this is sort of a self-reporting system, so whether or not the prices listed on DRAM Exchange directly match the contract prices that companies are paying, et cetera, we're aware of that situation. The spot prices that they're listing for GDDR6 memory, for example, has gone up from about $2.50 per 8 gigabit module, sort of maybe middle of last year, early parts of last year, to now being listed for $8 for an 8 gigabit module. So effectively, the price has gone up by at least triple for the current spot prices, a little more than triple. And based on the modeling that we did last year, that would mean about $100 price increase per each 8 gigabytes that are used on a GPU. So, and that's including margins and stuff. That's assuming, again, that NVIDIA, AMD pass on the full margin cost and everything to consumers, which seems to be what they're doing. But that would mean that for models being produced right now with that sort of spot price for memory, a product like an RTX 5060 with 8 gigabytes of G7 is probably going to cost at least $100 more than the $300 MSRP, which would make it $400, as sort of you were suggesting. So if Zotac's sort of warning that the price increases are enormous, yes, $100 additional on a product like a 5060, I would say is an enormous increase, especially because previously that would have gotten you like a 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte was available in November for about that price, slightly below MSRP. So obviously that you're now getting a much worse product for that price. So that'll be interesting to watch. The final topic that I wanted to talk about just briefly is Big Battlemage, the continuing story of how we have sort of suggested that this product is not viable and is not going to be released, but still seems to be rumored constantly. And the current rumors, which are actually potentially believable, is that the large BMG G31 design is coming to a Pro card and a Pro card only, called the Arc Pro B70, supposedly. So this will be part of the Pro series with potentially 32 gigabytes of memory. That's assumed because of its memory bus width and the amount of GDDR6 that's used on the other Pro cards. But the thinking is now that this GPU die will be released, just not as a gaming specific product, which would mean that they can sell it for a higher price. We were sort of saying that it's potentially not economically viable because the performance won't be that amazing. But for a Pro card, those sorts of things are different. So if this model is released, would you try and source one to test it for gaming, or is that sort of not at all interesting?
Yeah, I think I would get one for testing if I can. I'll do my best to get my hands on one anyway. Not sure how we'll source one, but we'll try. If this does turn out to be true and the Arc Pro B70 is a thing, we'll get it, and I guess we'll see what we can learn.
Does this seem like a sort of realistic potential now that they're sort of talking about it as a pro card as opposed to a gaming card?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot more sense given the current VRAM supply issues and pricing of things. Like, it'd obviously be amazing if we've said for a long time that a B770 type product won't really make sense given the CPU overhead issue, which they've mitigated to a degree, but it's still there, and they've sort of got to address it on a per game basis. So, given that problem, I believe, still exists, well, in a normal market, it would have been a struggle, but then with GeForce GPUs rapidly disappearing, Radeon GPUs also going up in price. I'm not saying they could somehow release a 16 gigabyte GPU on the cheap, but it would give them a chance. It was kind of like when the B580 was first announced. It had a real window of opportunity for them to capitalize on there at the $250 US MSRP, and it never materialized. It was just, they missed their window. By the time they hit the MSRP and they were available, we had the next generation GPUs from AMD and NVIDIA, and they were just a lot better. So kind of like the wind was well out of the sails on that one. But yeah, I given the current constraints and whatnot, I just think a B770 is probably not going to be viable, even in the face of no GeForce competition or very little. So going down the professional route would make sense, because they can put 16 gigabytes or whatever on that card, 32 gigabytes possibly, and sell it for quite a lot of money. So that would be very profitable for them. And with Intel needing the Arc GPUs to be profitable, because I'm not sure they have been terribly profitable to date, that would be a good way of going about things.
Yeah, it's interesting if they were able to sort of pivot back to making a B770. It seems like potentially with this B70, that was maybe their plan all along, was like, obviously, potentially it's not viable, so let's make it a pro card. It seems like the GPUs have been manufactured, or at least they have been designed at some point. So that means that there is something that they can use. So they're trying to figure out what to use it for. Pro card would have made sense last year. I think the problem that Intel's sort of facing is that the models, the gaming models that they've produced, they're not making really any money on them, as far as I understand. Like the margins on them are extremely low. So there's no real room for them to sort of adjust or try and compete based on crazy memory prices. Like, if they're having to sell the card for a certain price because that's what it costs to manufacture, now memory's so much more expensive, there's they just have to sell it for that price. Whereas previously, like last year, maybe that price would have been viable, but then, AMD can sort of adjust their pricing and do stuff like that. Intel just doesn't have that flexibility. So whatever the price would have ended up being, for a 16 gigabyte model, I mean, who knows what that would have cost these days to sort of release. And, when you're coming up with a price to release, you have to make sure that that price isn't like going to suddenly go up immediately. So the price they would have had to say is, maybe not something that we want to hear necessarily, especially because like 9060 XT 16 gigabyte models, you can get them right now, and there seems to be quite a bit of supply around $450. So obviously $100 more than the MSRP for that card, but then could a B770 have sort of matched that level? And that's sort of where I'd be expecting the performance to lie, around that mark. So again, we'll see what this pro card is like, though, because that'll be interesting to test. We're obviously not going to test too much of the pro level stuff, but just from a for science type testing, it'll be interesting to see how that larger GPU die goes, and whether our assumptions on things like overhead and stuff like that hold true for the larger GPU die. So hopefully it comes out and we'll be able to get our hands on one and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
For now, though, not a particularly long episode so far, but we just wanted to get in and talk about some news stuff. So let's take a break and we'll come back and get into our boring lives. All right, Steve, we're back. What has been happening in your just very exciting life? I mean, I was away at CES for a little bit. What have you been getting up to?
Well, I don't want to ruin this episode, but I'm going to save all of my boring life stories for the next one because I'm exhausted right now, and I actually have to leave shortly because my daughter has like her high school orientation and I don't want to miss that.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
I've got to leave very shortly. So I'll wrap this segment up as quick as we can. Plus, I'm just absolutely exhausted because I made the decision after some peer pressure from our Patreon members to stream last night, some gaming for the first time in a long time. And I did a 4.5 hour stream, and then we wrapped up at 1 o'clock. That's 1 a.m. in the morning. When the 9850X 3D reviews went out, I watched a couple of reviews and got to bed by about 2 a.m. And then I got woken up quite early because we're renovating our kitchen at the moment, and the guy that's renovating it turned up at 8:30, which isn't early, but when you got to bed at 2, having impact drills and hammers and things going off at 8:30, I wasn't sleeping through that. So I'm wrecked. We had a fun stream last night, so I'm glad the guys finally made me do it. I can't remember the last time I did it. It was many months ago. So I got it set up, got it mostly working. We had a lot of fun. But yeah, I am absolutely exhausted. But I did do a lot of different things while you're at CES that I would like to talk about, but I honestly just do not have the energy to do it right now. So I'm struggling to stay awake, and I've got to drive now, go to a high school, do all that, and not look like I'm about to pass out, despite the fact that I'm about to pass out. So not complaining. It's all fun, relatively easy stuff. It's just that I'm old and I stayed up too late. So.
Well, standard stuff. I am interested to know how you coped recently with the recent Australian heat wave down in our area, and how things are going out that way, because you live in a more rural part than I do, so you're more at risk of fires and stuff like that. You've got a nice generator just in case stuff goes wrong in your area. At my place the other day, it reached 47 degrees Celsius, and it was going outside was like stepping into an oven. So I think 47 degrees Celsius is about 117 degrees Fahrenheit. So the conversion for our US listeners, it's pretty hot. How was it out your way? Did you lose power or anything? You got to use that generator, or things just going fine out your way?
Disappointingly, things were just going fine out my way. So I got to 42 degrees here. And despite the fact that much of the state lost power, that's Victoria, I did not. And I told you, because I spent a disgustingly large amount of money on my own private power station, I would never need it. And so far, I can't say I've used it for about 4 days so far in the last year and a half, or however long ago I did it. But yeah, before I got it, we always lost power. And since I've purchased it, we can have an almost statewide blackout and I'm fine. So didn't get to use the generator. I know I'm almost disappointed that we didn't have a power failure, just so I could justify my investment and feel good about it. But no, it just sat there doing nothing, baking in the sun like the rest of us. But yeah, I had my big split system in the studio running. It was very nice and cool in here. So I can't say I suffered through the heat or anything. I went outside and I was like, nope, straight back inside, and I worked on my 9850X 3D review. So at least it encouraged me to do that instead. And I wasn't, looking terribly forward to spending a huge amount of time testing that CPU. But yeah, the 42-degree temperature encouraged me to stay indoors and do that instead. So that's what I did.
Yeah, same. I was working on, I think, the DLSS 4.5 video at that sort of time as well. And like for you, I think you have to go outside maybe briefly to get from your house to your sort of studio area. For me, it's a bit slightly longer of a walk. I'm not going to say it's hugely longer, but when it's 47 degrees outside, standing outside for any length of time, it's like just instant sweat. I
reckon it would be for you if you walk at a very casual pace, it'd be in the range of 15 or 20 seconds. Yeah. And so Tim's walking in a very casual pace. He's 15 or 20 seconds and almost perishing on the asphalt, making it to the house.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And then obviously there's been some fires in the area as well. So I think like the next day it was very smoky at my place, like very, very strong smell of the smoke, which has cleared up a little bit. I think wind directions have changed and stuff a bit like that. But yeah, unfortunately there's been, some pretty significant fires in some areas. Not too many people have lost houses, unlike some previous eras of fires. But yeah, it's been a weird one for us here in Australia. We had a pretty wet spring, and then that went into some very hot, very dry summer. So that's kind of like the worst sort of fire conditions and stuff like that. When I was over in CS, it was very hot and windy and stuff like that. So yeah, people have sort of suffered in our area in some areas, but so far it's just been hot, dry, and unpleasant to be outside. And it seems like that is going to continue throughout most of the rest of our summer. While we're hearing about people in Europe and America, as usual, suffering through extreme cold spells and stuff, and we're having to fire up the aircon all day because it's so hot. So yeah, that's all that's really been happening out my way as well. Not too many things to report out this way, just because I've been getting back from CES, getting stuck into some work and not doing all that much apart from that. So yeah, people have sort of seen the DLSS content and that's gone reasonably well. We'll probably do a few more things related to that. People have requested preset L testing. Obviously we focused on preset M in that video, but preset L has been requested. So we'll get into doing things like that. And there's plenty of other stuff that you will see, a lot more monitor content as well, of course, because monitors are not affected, thankfully, by crazy component pricing at the moment. So you'll see a bit more testing of that. But yeah, Steve, we have hit our hard out for this episode effectively at this point. You have to go. So we're going to have to end this podcast episode. Thanks to everyone for listening in this week. We will be back next week with some more stuff as well. So we're going to continue with exciting topics as they come in. And as we said, this year might be a challenge, but we'll come up with some stuff for you guys to listen to. So if you do want to support Hardware Unboxed and the podcast, we do have our Patreon. That will give you access to the ad-free version. Outside of that, we just appreciate people listening, either via the YouTube channel or via all your local feeds and stuff like that. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.